And just noting that we're recording our meeting. We just like to announce that for the public. With that, we're also broadcasting to folks who may be at home as well. Another note, as the planning board begins this meeting, for those who might be here for 18 Highland, there's likely to be a continuance of that. The applicant requested earlier today, a continuance to the February 4th meeting. So anyone who's here for that, probably want to stay around. Then I'll defer to the chair and usual protocols.
Good. This is the January 7th, 2026 meeting of the planning board. We'll start with roll call. Brian Balcom.
Here.
Jen Bluestein.
Here.
Alden Clark is not here. Charlie Palmisano is not here. Jamie Penny.
Here.
Rick Tainter. Here. Jack Matera.
Here.
Matt Heffron.
Here.
I am here. Okay, we have public hearings tonight, two of them now, one for Country Club Estates, Woodman Way, one for Next Grid, and as Andy said, the Caswell Development Project at 18 Highland Avenue. They requested a continuance, so there will be no discussion of that project this evening. So we'll start with Country Club Estates. Andy, if you can give us a little bit of
Context, I think we have it here to represent the applicant as well. Just a little bit of context, picking up where we left off at the last hearing. The planning board had looked for input from council. There had been some discussion about whether or not the applicant was actually properly positioned to apply as essentially the owner's rep. In this case, it's a condo association as the trust. So the question there becomes, is this the right party? Legal counsel had been looking into this issue and determined that that was not in fact the case. They had communicated that in a letter that was uploaded to the Open Gov record where the documentation is provided to the board. The board has that in hand, and I don't know, to the extent the applicant wants to address or speak to any of those areas. We did receive the attorney's request for a continuance to the February 4th meeting, I think, to look into this and maybe respond back with for some further detail in response to that opinion from the city's legal counsel. But that context should be given, I guess, at the outset here, in advance of any discussion about the site plan itself. There were, of course, discussions about some tweaks in the site plan itself based on what was presented.
Is anyone here representing? I think, to Andy's point, I think we're not in a position tonight to talk about site plan detail. We have this issue of representation on the table that we need to have resolved first. So I don't think it's constructive to really talk about the site plan until all of that. So if you want to address any of those issues, that's fine. We're not here to talk about the site plan details tonight.
For the record, Paul Gershner, Sam Canary. I'm only here to talk about the site plan, so I really have nothing to offer. The other regarding shit. That's really attorneys.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'll open the public hearing for public comment. If anyone wants to make a comment this evening, you're welcome to do that.
Hi everyone, my name is Deb Giorgio. I live at 55 Clipper Way at the neighboring condominium association. I did read the letter regarding request for continuance, and my biggest concern is that when I search the registry of deeds, the most recent certificate for trustees that I was able to locate is more than 12 years old. So I think it was maybe 2014. So I'm concerned that there haven't been elections and that somehow they're going to try and put together information that may not fully represent the ownership. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Frank Clapp. I'm a butter at 41 Clipper Way. I have one question for the board. What I don't understand is based on what the legal attorney has said, where they said that there's no representation or legal entity representing the board of trustees for the people that live in Country Club Estates, where there's no legal entity, I don't understand why we would even not, why we wouldn't consider denying this request, because a board's gonna have to be appointed, and they're gonna have to decide based on what the community decides. If there's actually a board, a legal board, the community's gonna have to vote on whether they even wanna have a parking lot. So in my mind, it's premature to even present an actual plan to do a parking lot until there's actually a legal HOA association. And I would just like the board to consider that denial as, as the agenda points out that there may be a denial. Thank you.
Any other comment? Okay, we'll close public comment. I think to move this forward, we, as a board, we have two ways of moving forward. One is to, grant a continuance. Could grant a continuance until our next meeting. To me, it's unrealistic to think this will get resolved on the applicant side in that timeframe. And to the speaker's point a minute ago, if there is a new board in place, this may not be the scheme that is presented going forward. So it would make sense to me to deny the application without prejudice. And whenever this gets resolved, allow the applicant to come back and present whatever scheme they were. I think those two options are in front of us right now. I would recommend that. I think that's the cleanest way of dealing with this right now. I don't think there's any way we can predict how long it will take to resolve this on the other side. So that's kind of where I am. I'd like to get to a motion so that we can just move.
I just have and you said that continuance was requested. Is that by our council?
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, that was from the applicant's council. I don't necessarily want to say the owner's council, because that's the exact question, we have here. So, legal counsel for the city had indicated that that was not the proper party. And they're in the condo association. So, so the sum result here is that, city's legal counsel said the board would be in a position where it could deny the application itself based on, not having the proper authorization of the property owner and be in a position to apply for the permit. Therefore, they essentially cover the property that way. And
So
so
the request didn't come from the city.
the request from the continuing came from the applicant's attorney. Yeah, and basically indicating that they, having had a quick phone call before the request, indicating that they wanted a little another week or two time in order to submit some additional documentation to respond to legal counsel's letter from the city.
Thank you.
Follow-up question, just because it's been so long, I think we've had withdrawals. What would be the rule for resubmittal? Is a repetitive petition issue?
Yeah, so I would not see that being an issue here. I think that if the board were to deny this application here, summarily just based on lack of, being properly before the board, essentially making it mechanically before addressing the details of a site plan. To me, that would be a relatively simple decision, focused specifically on that status understanding. And it would not preclude the applicant, so to speak, or the property owner from coming back when that issue is resolved. I think in this case, given what we do know, we would have to, I think, check with legal counsel to make sure that this legal counsel agrees and concurs that the new applicant is properly before the board representing the property owner or owners.
So would that say that we should add language to, if it was so forth, a denial
Yeah.
without prejudice in our thoughts on, it's not, if a new applicant came with a legally binding applicant, we wouldn't.
Correct. And I'll leave it to you in terms of any motion, if you want to say, so Luke or so forth, but I think the written decision, if it was denial, I think what we should include or would include some language just indicating that the rationale is based on the legal counsel, that the applicant is not in a proper standing to apply for the permit and come to the property as such. And therefore, the applicant or property owner is welcome to apply, once that issue is resolved sufficiently, but given the context, will be run by legal counsel, to make sure that it does actually test those stuff.
So the steps would be for, whatever the reconstituted board of trustees is, for them to provide that information to us
As part of the
as
application.
part of the application. That would be reviewed by council for the city, and then we would decide how to go forward.
Can I make a motion? I guess I would word the motion to say that, the board finds that on the advice of our council, that the application is not properly before us. We vote to deny the application without prejudice. Is that sufficient?
Yes, and I agree with the without prejudice, meaning what we're talking about here is without prejudice to a site plan specifically. The board is not, acting on any, you're recognizing that you never really resolved any issue with respect to a site plan. You look at that again. That, again, this is sort of a prerequisite to look at the application here. We've seen that isn't, an issue here.
Start fresh with the right applicant. Right.
I'll second the motion.
Second. We have everybody here, so we can do a show of hands. All those in favor? Vote. Good.
Thank you.
Application is denied. Next on the agenda is, expert.
Good evening, Chair and members of the board. Thank you for having us here this evening. My name is Emma Musto. I work for TRC Company. And I am here representing NextGrid and Mike Patterson as the civil battery energy storage system located at 23 Low Street in the beautiful city of Newburyport. It's my understanding that although this is my first time presenting, you all have had a pretty good amount of time to look over the site. In the interest of time, I just want to ask if you would like for me to go through all the details or if there are things that you would like to specifically get right into. Either one is
I
fine with
think
me.
if you could give us an overview.
Absolutely.
That would be helpful.
Absolutely. So this
Sorry,
is
just for references, I pulled up from our mapping system, just the GIS, just showing that we're really talking about the back portion of the property here. So with that, I'm just going to flip to, I think, the one drawing does show the salient information.
fantastic, perfect. Yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah, so just as Mr. Port mentioned, this proposed redevelopment is going to be located at the southern portion of this parcel, 23 Low Street, which is right now a wholesale lumber business. So it's already developed fully. This is a just under 5 megawatt battery energy system. And what you're seeing up there, one of the things I want to highlight is that what looks like to be a proposed drive is actually just a visual aid showing the utility that they have the necessary space they need. They need a 20-foot clearance for utility maintenance and such. We're not actually proposing any drive or parking works for this site. So the hexagonal pattern that you see underlying the BESS system to the east, that is represented, that's a crushed stone yard. So it's not going to actually be an impervious yard, it's a pervious yard. And the impervious areas are the battery equipment pads and ancillary equipment pads. But otherwise, no other impervious surfaces are proposed. We have the total limit of disturbance is just under an acre. It's about 3/4 of an acre. And we have very limited clearing, which we have gone over pretty extensively with the Newburyport Conservation Commission, and it was approved last night for a request. So we requested a determination of applicability, and they did go ahead and grant us. They agreed with all of our plans and our clearing plans. So we are right now proposing about 0.06 acres of clearing, which comes to, I think there's about 42 trees. Other than that, as you can see to the left, there is a utility pole cluster, which will run southward down to the POI, the point of interconnection, at the existing pole just to the south there. There's only one underground run, which is a utility run. It's going to be about 200 linear feet, and it's going to be excavated to a minimum of 4 feet based on National Electric Code. The only other excavations are going to be for the crushed stone yard. Usually they'll get an even grade there and go for maybe about 2 feet below grade, depending, so that they can layer the crushed stone as well as a drainage layer. And then the other excavation will be for the equipment pads, the concrete equipment pads. Those aren't necessarily, we need to do some geotechnical and structural calculations, which will be done later on in the project. So I don't have the exact figures for how deep those excavations will go. But I did prepare a dewatering and possible soil excavation plan. So that if while under construction, there's dewatering activities that need to occur, the contractor will have a path forward, as well as if they happen to run across any unsuitable soils. We don't necessarily anticipate a large amount of dewatering at the site, nor do we anticipate unsuitable soils. However, those two aspects of the plan have been thought through. So with that, I think that could be the end of my spiel. Is there anything anybody wants to touch on specifically that I may have failed to mention?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
As I got it for the record, and both the fire, there was a little bit back and forth, making sure the fire department was comfortable, vegetation clearance and whatnot around the battery storage and whatnot. New kind of thing that's happening a lot more, of course, and the fire department just wants to make sure safety. Conservation Commission met last night, and I understand they approved as well. So we don't have any major separation.
I just want to ask that the area that looks like a driveway but isn't a driveway,
Yes.
what is that?
So that is it's just a visual aid for the utility company to show that we are giving them their 20-foot clearance. There won't actually be anything.
So just grass or something.
Well, right now it's a compacted gravel because it's still part of this developed parcel. So it's all compacted gravel down in that area. It's not going to be, it looks like a driveway on the plans, which I know is a little bit confusing, but it's really for the utilities sake, so that they can see that we've given them the proper amount of clearance for them to do any sort of maintenance they might need to do.
So from a visual point of view, what we'd be seeing would be the crushed stone area and then the pad and then the.
That's exactly right. And there will be a fence around the crushed stone pad and the best system, of course. So the fence will be seen as well. But other than that, no other changes are actually happening except for that footprint, that hexagonal sort of patch that I have there. Those are going to be the only visual impacts that occur on the site. Otherwise, everything will look the exact same and the lumber business will continue to operate.
Does the equipment generate noise, sound?
So there are inverters that are connected to it. They max out at 70 decibels measured at 9 feet from the cabinets themselves.
Okay.
Just for context, this conversation right now is 60 decibels.
Okay.
And one thing I did want to mention as well, as for conversations with the fire department, we do have, you can see sort of just north of right there, there's a line where no material storage will occur south of that line to make sure that they can get down there and have free access to anything that they might need in case of an emergency, which we're not anticipating and we're.
I have a question. Who owns the battery system?
So that would be our company, NextGrid. We would own the battery system itself, and then it's through the Clean Peaks program, where we basically buy power from the grid at a discount rate, and then it is discharged during peak hours, which is 2 to 8 p.m. Daily.
So you have a contract with the ISO or who?
With the utility, yes, we have a contract. It's called an interconnection service agreement with National Grid.
I just get clarity on the Conservation Commission approval. Was it a negative determination for the bill?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
not in order, not be.
Not in order conditions.
And that's a chain link fence?
That's chain link fence, yeah.
Any other question? Open the floor to public comment. If anyone wants to make a comment, please come forward. State your name and address. close the public comment. Any other questions or discussion? And, we can talk about motion.
I'll move to, grant approval of the site plan as presented.
Second, Brian, all those in favor? Opposed? Site plan is approved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Interesting project.
Thank you.
Yeah, they're coming up more often nowadays.
Oswald Development, 18 Highland Avenue, they have requested a continuance, as we mentioned earlier. Motion. We just need a motion to grant the continuance. Preparing for. Second. All in favor? Okay. So we can close the public hearing and move on to general business. First item is a request for minor modification for 11 Delton Drive.
I can flip through whatever sheets you want here.
Yeah, did you get the latest update that was on that station?
Segmentation.
Yeah,
I did look, I didn't see anything.
this is the first time you guys sort of get up to speed on it.
Yeah, no, that's probably right. Give me 1 second. Attachments.
Yeah,
Is that-
I have a-
We usually grab data meeting, but
while he's going through that, my name is Ben Williams. FBI Architecture.
I'm James Maloney, homeowner of 11 Duffy Drive, also representing my wife. She's 6 months pregnant, so she can't make it right now. And we got a 2-year-old, so.
So he's got 3 months to finish this project.
Yes. To put it mildly.
no stress at all.
So James approached us and asked us if we could look at making a master suite above the garage, so expanding their house and making it more the proper size for what their family is growing into. And this is a house that they do want to stay here for a long time.
And if I may, I'm a local guy. In Rowley and Ipswich, and we first landed here in March 2020 at 479 Merrimack Street. And what a scary time to buy your first house. Move up here, but it was worth it, and we want to stay in Newburyport. And we found Duffy, so just wanted to put that.
And they love the new community. So that was really a key part. They wanted to make sure that still kept the character of the neighborhood. So as we were developing, and move to next slide. So this is the existing first floor that is staying the same, changes to it. And then we go to the next one. This is the second floor where it is the previous owners who were the ones that had the built. They had, it's a 2-bedroom with an office or extra space off to the side. And then the core is really where all the plumbing is for the building. And they never connected to the garage. A lot of the other properties in this development had done. So they asked us if we could rework this so they could do a connection to the garage and also make it so that they have a bedroom for each of the kids and keep a bedroom. So when the in-laws come, when they come, well, when the mother comes, it's not for a couple days, it's a month or so.
Yeah.
So
Long period.
So they wanted to make sure they did have a place for her to be there. You enjoy it, you can go to the next screen. So this is the new layout for highlighting the area where we're changing it, making the kids' bedrooms in the back, giving them a shared bathroom for them, keeping the bedroom in the front for the in-laws and having a bathroom that they can use separate from the kids, and then connecting to above the garage and making it a proper suite, primary suite for them with having their own bathroom, closet, bedroom space. The other one is, I don't know how many are familiar with the development, but there's a beautiful space in the back of it, the wildlife area, a lot of birds and stuff. So one of our things was trying to make sure they had a nice view from the bedroom going out to that sanctuary area. So this is the roof, and then so this is the front elevation showing the added part above the garage and over the breezeway back to the main house, so the connection. And then the next one, and this is the back and the side. See that one? And then if you go to the next one, this is a view from the street, so you can see as you're coming up how that fits with the existing building. You can go to the next one. And then here's from the other side. And you can go to the final slide. In this one, we were contacted that there was a concern with the type of dormer and the dormer. So when we were looking at this, these are two other properties in the development that we were taking some cues from and just showing that the dormers on there do actually come out to the face of the garage as well. What we're doing here. So this is where we were taking our cues from. We were doing this, and we understand that the concern is the dormers. But this is what we've been told, and so we'd like to hear your feedback on any questions you guys might have about this.
The plan shows her closet. Where's his?
Lucky to get the foyer. So I get a little book nook and a little closet area. It's kind of an offshoot, but I got to make it work. I got my dream bride, so I want to give her a castle. So.
Just, go ahead.
Yeah, those two houses are as built, those are original construction.
So
Was that?
they're in the same development.
One of them was, I think, one or both of them was post-built. So when I had the architects look at this, I also grew up on Little Neck. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that place. I'm very familiar, fourth generation. But we've always had a small cottage down there, and keeping things to look the same as your neighbors as they would want it is hugely important in conservation. So I made sure that they mocked it up as our neighbors would have it. So it didn't look outlandish or anything like that. But to give us the space that we needed, because the houses, I can't remember how many properties in 2019 were set up there after the golf course was gone. They put the dormers kind of really short and didn't maximize the space from what we could observe. And it looks like some other residents had been able to take advantage and make it a little bit bigger, and it looks great, and it looks like the other ones that it matches. So we thought it would be a great idea to model after them. So.
Couple of questions, and thank you for finding these two photographs. I took a little Google Maps drive around your neighborhood for the meeting, and there are lots of other examples that take the ridge of the roof and turn it so that the ridge is parallel with the street. And the massing of those houses seems a little simpler.
Yeah.
I guess. And I wondered if you looked at that at all, in terms of an option to.
So we didn't directly take a look at one of those are the different roof style itself as well in the previous space. Oh, sorry. we weren't looking at changing the ridge line of this. We do find that having the ridge line perpendicular to the main house helps break up the house. So and help, end up breaking up the large massing of a house. So we try to keep that ridge line going that direction. So we didn't look at that. Plus some of those other homes, it is a completely different style that they have. So it's without touching the main house, we didn't really want to go.
Can you go back to the roof plan? I'm still not clear on how the dormer on the right-hand side of the garage meets the roof. And then kind of
Space here.
yeah.
Just trying to show that detail.
I'm sorry, but
45. Or I guess, sorry, we're actually seeing it here.
yeah. So yeah, so the dormer, the ridge line for the dormers is the ridge line. And they extend out to the edge of the garage, so that the wall does go straight up, but the roof and the eaves do wrap around, they can break up. They can break it up.
So the cheek wall of the dormer and the gable wall are the same.
Yes. Yeah, so you can see
There. See.
Actually, the question is, for Andy, why is this before us? Why are we looking at a house, in addition to a house that's already been built and we're not changing the footprint? I just don't understand.
Yeah.
I don't get the reason for seeing this.
So the OSRD subdivisions, remember, those are special permits. They're not regular subdivisions where they just become truly as of right lots. They're still subject to special permits. So again, this is going back a number of years to a very lengthy, decision and permit process. But the 38 new homes that were built there, essentially, they all have in the overall development scheme, there's a set of parameters, including things like, typical architectural plans that are permitted at the outset before, things coming back to the board and whatnot. So the reason for this is it's a deviation from the parameters originally established there in terms of the consistency of the architecture, and whatnot. So in essence, if this was a truly just an entirely separate subdivision, or if that enough of that specificity wasn't boiled into the original special permit decision, the applicant wouldn't necessarily need to be here if it was original, like a normal subdivision. But in this case, it was a special permit with a unique development pattern with the open space areas. And the cargo for the lots they were configured and whatnot. And so there was also things like limits of total additional space that folks could build because it's over the water supply and whatnot. So there are some other unique parameters related to the type of development here. And this is, it happens in various trees depending on the type of permit, the type of project. And that's the reason why. If it was a true just as of right lots, it would be not any trigger whatsoever.
So nobody on the board now was on the board then.
Correct. Yeah.
And did the board approve a specific architectural plan for each lot?
There were a couple of options. I don't have everything in front of me right at the moment, but there were a couple of options, essentially a spectrum of options, simply, models essentially. And I think you had a similar situation essentially happened with the one called environmentally, but and it was essentially standardized, options essentially. There's been a few that have been modified since the original development, just the last couple of years, a few tweaks or expansions or modifications folks want to make off of that.
So does this go on forever? That anybody who comes in, if they want to enclose their front porch or something like that, they have to come back to us?
Well, I mean, you saw it on, was it Doyle, the Colby Farm.
But that was an expansion.
Yeah.
Big expansion.
That was an expansion. A lot.
Yeah.
When did this start?
It's not, I mean, it's the same in terms of a change to the plans that the board had originally contemplated and approved the decision. If, for instance, if the board on a, project like this going forward, the board had decided we're gonna give, full latitude without anything having to come back to us or define that line, the board could have defined it that way, but the applicant as presenting it with these plan options and the board therefore memorializing the plans and decision as such, That's what got baked into and locked into the decision. If the applicant, the developer had said, you know, we want these options, but we don't want to be encumbered by them, we want to do future expansions without any kind of limits, then it would be back to just the zoning requirement for setbacks and not being fully board and whatnot. But the developer had basically presented, we'll try to have some comparable architecture. So this is a proposal.
It'd be really nice if they could tell their neighbors not to do anything to their houses.
This is it. Yeah.
Did those other two houses have to go through the same process?
I can't recall off the top of my head. I'd have to go back. Each one of these, you know, there's some of it, I remember there being at least a few instances where there was sort of a question of the total square footage they could add, and they sort of, you know, were capping out one or two of the lots there. I can't remember frankly on these lots, the particulars there. I imagine there was something that came before the board here, but it's been, you know, I'm not paying attention to all of the details.
Do you guys know those other houses?
When did this subdivision get approved originally?
Yeah, 2011, a couple of years. 8 years ago.
So the world's probably changed since that time.
Yeah, again, it's really up to the board. Like you said, it's an entirely different proposition. So speaking of the boards, you might have different, you know, perspectives than the original board. Again, in a lot of respects, you could treat this as a normal, you know, as of right lot, so to speak, you know, from that perspective. It's done as, this one was done, I would say, more so as like a traditional subdivision in terms of a construction roadway versus say like the Colby Park Lane one was like extremely compact. It's configuration of the houses. These have, I think, a little bit more space associated with them.
And that was encroaching.
And that was also going, in that case, they were actually looking for a further reduction within the scope of what the plan review.
Yeah.
Very tight. Yeah. This is not, you know, I think within that same ballpark.
So do you like the plan?
I'm sorry?
Do you like the plan?
I do. I
Does your
do.
wife
I'm
like the plan?
ambivalent about the closet situation you had alluded to earlier, but marriage is about compromise. So there's that. But yes, I love it too.
It's way over.
If
I like
you
it.
hadn't shown me those two photographs, I might have pushed a little harder on turning this 90 degrees. But there's seems to be very acceptable examples of what you're trying to do in the neighborhood already. So I'm not gonna push back on it. So any other questions? So I'll entertain a motion.
Is the motion to determine it minor?
Correct, yeah, so just to be for the clarity, you should first determine and then include, but you can do it as one motion if you want, procedurally, but determine it's minor and then.
So I would make a motion to determine the application minor modification and to grant the application.
A second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Opposed?
Thank you very much.
Best of luck.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Good luck with your
Thank
project.
May 14th is the due date, so it's gonna be here sooner than later. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks.
Okay. Minute. I see 8:20 on your.
Yeah, that was,
Long walk.
No, actually, something lost in translation. Unfortunately, the person who typically is in the was out, so it might have been a discrepancy where it was just unfortunately carried over.
oh,
So
has
it has been, yeah, so that actually should be
I
off.
thought we just raised the white flag.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
apologies, that's not on the.
So did the video. So did the video, whatever it is.
Those are from the 12/17, we haven't seen yet.
No, because like our applicant, my due date is also May 14th. So I will not be your minute taker forever because I'm having a baby. So yeah.
We have to make a motion for that.
Hopefully you approve that.
Good night. Motion to approve.
So yeah, I'll get that to you soon. What?
What date was that?
I'm having a baby on May 14th.
May
So the
14th?
minutes are December 17th.
17, I wasn't sure.
Okay. So yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you.
Yes.
Put that in the notes.
having a baby.
No, I-
Congrats.
Other business.
Yes,
unanimous.
yeah.
So we'll have to chat about
Yeah, we
when I
could,
can't sit here longer.
yeah,
Missing you already.
Thank you.
especially if it happens a little sooner than, you know.
Yeah, I think, yeah, we should be prepared.
Okay, so we have annual election.
Wasn't sure, just because there wasn't right here tonight.
Alden is not here tonight, Charlie is not here tonight. So I'm wondering if you're all okay with pushing this off to the next meeting. I don't think we'll have Alden back then, but we'll. But I'm, as I said, the last meeting, I'm happy to continue doing what I'm doing. And having fun with it, as hard as that is to do. Let's try to take care of this meeting. I don't know how he feels about continue. I don't want to assume anything on his.
Has Alden expressed an opinion on his role? Does he want to stay? Has Alden mentioned staying in his role?
I asked him at the last meeting and he was okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you won't be here.
So any other business? Do you want to talk at all? I don't know in terms of we talked about
Yeah, sure.
just how we might address this.
Yeah, I guess my only concern is just not necessarily sort of opening up the hearings, subject matter, so to speak. So, just in brief, we had some discussion about alternative layout and, dealing with, how the neighborhood impact could be reduced if the lot configurations were made more flexible. However, trying to accomplish that through the current zoning is a little more difficult. So the idea there was perhaps advancing a zoning amendment that would allow the planning board to look at alternative layouts through the permitting. A little bit more like what you do with open space residential developments, what the developer could propose to So in essence, where the zoning might be actually constraining even the board's options to mitigate neighborhood impact in looking at the project. The conversation we've had thus far is that something like that might be mobilized to the city council. So I don't want to prejudice that process, but if that advances, that may cycle its way back in as as the applicant circling back with you. And so like give you, as well as the applicant, more flexibility in the plan layout beyond that, I guess that would wait until the next.
What would that be for timing?
So again, that's a great question. The process for that, frankly, is more like a month or two at least to get through a zoning amendment process. So assuming, well, yeah, sorry.
I was gonna say.
2 months is a fast amendment, to be clear. We've had amendments and discussions about amendments for like a 3-year period. So, in this case, a fast track or something like this, for like a 2-month track, basically. You get it.
So it wouldn't interrupt the applicant necessarily unduly.
I do think,
For 6 months or.
yeah, I would anticipate a debate over something like this particular, sort of feature of the zoning, whether it's included or not, being this.
I think just speaking generic, not about either definite, but when you look at the R2 regulation, the lot size, the front yard setback, the buildable area, it's all way out of scale with the older neighborhoods in Newburyport. And, there could be potentially a broader discussion about changing the R2 zoning or creating some kind of zoning that applies to these older neighborhoods that have smaller sites and smaller setback dimensions. I don't know that there's a lot of support for doing that. So what Andy's describing is a way for address almost on like a special permit basis, site by site, where there's kind of a glaring discrepancy between context and what the zoning ordinance allows. It allows us to have some say in on a case by case basis. I would be in favor of the broader change to the zoning, but I don't know if that can happen.
I think it would have, I think people who could see this in their neighborhoods, we had this discussion, Myra.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
I think we should continue to talk about it. we as a board, we should start to push that discussion. And I would be very much in favor. Meantime,
But this,
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I should have clarified as well. So having, and again, I'm not prejudiced, but I agreed it already to draft an amendment for this purpose. And so try to work with one or two councilors to get that into the first council meeting packet, which would be the 20th of January. But that would require another committee and so forth. So we do, at least as of now, I would anticipate it seems more likely that that amendment would be making its way forward, at least for consideration by the city council planning board sometime in February.
so so there's there are a couple ways to do this. So one way is to look at it for this particular site. So you're redeveloping the area. Another way is to give special permit on a lot by lot basis. And that becomes, then the zoning becomes unpredictable in a way, but maybe more predictable than if you give it to the zoning board. So for variance, so I would agree with that. And I've seen that done in other places. Say to give the planning board the authority to reduce setbacks by 50% or something. But I do think in the long run, it makes sense to zone the neighborhoods for what they are. And it's not, I looked at that 2019 report and that suggested it to be 2 new zones or something, two new versions of R2. I think it's more than that. I think it's 3 or 4. I don't think that my neighborhood is like this neighborhood. It's like on my right. They were very different, depending on when the houses were built. So, okay.
I guess the only thing I always worry about in these things is the spot zoning discussion, where you say you have an applicant, a landowner, and all of a sudden you look at it and say, well, to the owner, we're gonna rezone your land. Right, where there's an applicant
That's actually why what we were talking about, I think conceptually here, is actually more universally allowing the planning board when it looks at, say, Courts and Lane, to do it the same way you effectively have that tool with the open space residential developments, where you effectively have a larger piece of land and someone will develop it, there's a few homes, it might allow you and the applicant to work together to cluster or concentrate that development impact on one area or other of the site, rather than sprawling the impact across the entire site and affecting all others. So, conceptually, so in this case, it wouldn't be spot zoning that specific property. It would be actually allowing the planning board for similar applications like this one. This one just happened to be right before the board right now, but applications like this for the board to have the same latitude.
Yeah, well,
So-
someone's got to trigger it, right? And so I get that part,
Yeah.
but it was,
Yeah.
no one ever came to us and would we have this conversation? And I'm all for it in some sense, but I also say, there is an applicant, and then all of a sudden you're in his business and you're trying to get something that you want as an outcome. And, there's a balance there somewhere, I'm sure.
Well, this actually came before us before with the same developer on Hancock Street. Remember, and he put the buildings at the zoning setback. He wanted to be able to come closer to the street, but he wasn't willing to go through. And I think that's the same. So this is the second time it's come before us.
Yeah, and you also have to recognize, I'm sorry, just in terms of the variance, you have to recognize variances also have to come with the burden of having to demonstrate hardship. And I think that's a little harder case to make if you're proposing development, it's a proposed scheme as opposed to the existing condition that's a hardship. So it makes more sense conceptually to make something like that, leave by special permit in this case, where it's more about the neighborhood impact and the board's discretion than it is about the applicant having the hardship you need to the project.
Well, there's got to be a tension field at some point anyways, right? Whether we go through the way it is now when we have to discuss, do something broader. Just, again, something in the back of my head always says, make sure that when you do it, you don't impose our needs, right? It's a balance.
I mean, I'd be surprised if there were many neighborhoods in the R2 district that applied to that setback requirement.
Right.
Can't think of it.
As you know, around Massachusetts, that's pretty common, unfortunately, superimposed dimensional requirements.
Well, there is the front yard, the mean front yard of your neighbors, provision in the ordinance, right? I haven't read it.
Yeah, that only addresses some piece of it
And that just wouldn't work on a Courts Lanes type
Because
application.
there's no mean,
there's no existing.
nothing existing.
But could that be modified to just say like of this, the block that it's, instead of just like the straight line of the facades of that development, like couldn't it be like the block that it's on or
It
something?
said, yeah,
Well, it depends on how you define the block, I guess. If you're talking about the existing homes around it, I guess that would depend on how we.
But it says on the same street, so we have to say on nearby streets. or something
Yeah.
like that.
Don't get me wrong, I think this is super exciting. I think it's super exciting trying to make our zoning match what we do. But I think that there's probably a pinch point on this conversation, because the OSRD
Yeah.
approach, which says you cluster it and then you have open space, is not the same as saying, let's rebuild this neighborhood, which would probably be like 10 homes, much more tightly packed.
Yeah.
And there's opposition to that kind of infill development. Unfortunately, I don't necessarily agree with that, but so you've got to pick a lane on how you approach it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think by only talking about the front setback, you're saying the issue of replicating the neighborhood.
And there'll be probably 10 houses.
It's a smaller lot.
Yeah.
That's what I
The
heard.
other thing, that I mentioned you in the past, I think we should, it would have worked great for this site if we had done it, was the, chapter 40Y starter home overlay district, which would allow, it would have allowed 8 homes and separate homes on the site at a very small lot size, very flexible development, close to the street and everything like that. By right, no special permit, we're following design guidelines. And if we knew about this a year ago, then this project would be approved by.
Yeah.
I just had a clarifying question, understanding that we're not discussing the project now, but it'd be helpful when we eventually do. When we did the site visit, and in some of the letters submitted from a butter, there was a question raised about whether the stipulation when the site was originally developed, that there'd be a certain amount of tree cover, whether that carried over.
Just to be clear.
And I was curious about,
Yeah.
since there seemed to be raising some lack of clarity about it, I was wondering if this.
Yeah, just to be
give us-
clear, and I think I might have spoken to it last meeting, I apologize, but just to provide, I prefer not to go down the road any further talking about this specific application. I think it would lead to late to the hearing. But to be clear, that variance would not carry, that condition would not carry over here. It's not something running in perpetuity. It was basically for the life of that use of that
The
variance.
covenant essentially for that.
It was a condition of the variance.
But only in relation to the use that's there today, essentially, so. Yeah. So that's the way. Wow. Second. I just, maybe I should speak, that's briefly. Institution for savings, for those of you who, I think we've talked about, you were aware of some rooftop equipment. Expected. And so we're expecting them now on the February 4th meeting to be coming in. We'll see what they present. I believe they've uploaded only drawings right now that show the existing conditions. And they're expected to upload some additional materials showing what they're supposed to do to mitigate or resolve the issue, whether that's relocating equipment or screening or a combination or whatnot. But they were essentially advised when they had asked for an occupancy permit, they could not get an occupancy permit because this issue was unresolved, and so they were directed back to the planning board to resolve this issue one way or the other. So we could see a scenario in which they had an occupancy in advance of all the work being done potentially, but it seemed quite obvious that without any agreement, there was a clear discrepancy with the plans that were approved and no agreement with the planning board from there about how that issue would be resolved and when. That would not be a reasonable basis, I guess. So they were directed to come back and present that option and approach to the board.
If they come back, we've had a couple of meetings with them. They tend to present things in 3D SketchUp views, which are remarkably inaccurate. To the extent that the existing 1980s edition was not the last thing. So I would insist that if they come before the board to talk about this with information about what they're proposing, that you have elevations, you have building sections, roof plans, all with dimensions and equipment identified. And they can present 3D stuff all they want, but I would like something that we can attach to an agreement that represents a contract.
Agreed.
Otherwise, this is like a non-story.
Yeah, again, they have to supplement that some materials to show the detail of what they're doing. You know, so we'll have to see where that goes. It may take a little more meeting depending on where they are.
And they're on hold right now as far as that portion of the project.
They were told that they could not get into occupancy, for the building office and they were just around the building. They were told basically just for the holidays, they asked if they could get an occupancy, sort of an interim occupancy while they resolve this issue. Not knowing exactly when that issue would, effectively resolve and how, what mechanism, it's a lot harder to resolve an issue when occupancy is ready to a tenant. It's a little bit less interesting,
Basically, done.
as far as I can tell, most of the work's been done. So I think it's really unfortunate. It seems to me that somewhere along the way, Paul got dropped. When an architect or a team is preparing specifications for a bid package for construction, normally you're going to be specifying, so there's going to be some kind of specification for mechanicals, and it's going to speak to what the system needs to do. Here, it seemed to me the architectural team should have very clearly incorporated some restrictions on the size of the equipment and its design externally, so that it didn't run afoul of the planning board's approval and all the debate we had at that time. Unfortunately, the architect, seemed to have missed the fact that that was crucial and essential to the project and the plans, and so it got missed, and then they sort of ended up saying, oh yeah, we just got rushed, the equipment came out, there was something before we really knew what was happening. And that is a controllable situation.
Custom fabricated piece of equipment could have been anything.
Right.
That is.
And there's a submittal approval that's got stamps all over it and comments, right? It's not missed, it's just not appreciated.
Is that their excuse that it was right?
No, I mean, I'm summarizing briefly the idea that sort of like, the review of shop drawings and so forth, the contract. Again, I'm not going to speak for the architect or, that, but it seems quite obvious that a ball got dropped there in recognizing that the size, scale of the plans and the exterior equipment as well on the roof was a fundamental component of that approval. And so whatever plans they put out for bid, whatever contractors, or in this case, subcontractors for mechanicals they were working with, whatever happened along the way there, whether it was the initial specifications, which I didn't see, or it was review of shop drawings from manufacturers and contractors saying, here's what we're going to put up there. In either case, those shop drawings or plans and specifications did not control the size of that equipment adequately before it went up there. And that's where we are.
Somebody didn't measure twice.
Remember, I mean, all of that stuff in any project gets picked over a lot. I mean, there's a whole general contractor signs off on it, mechanical contractor signs, the engineer signs off. I mean, but no one wants to pay money. So everyone freezes when it's not right.
If there's a performance spec that is the baseline for the equipment, performance spec says it can only be this high.
Yeah.
That's it. The entire installation, including whatever curve it's on, can only be this high. That was the missing piece of information. So no one had that criteria. Kind of fabrication and stuff. So it showed up, and then they put it on a curve and pushed it up higher.
Can I ask a question? So it sounds like Jennifer's made a determination of some sort, verbal or written, that it's not compliant. Are they just going to come to us and ask us to override Jennifer, or are they going to be proposing some mitigation?
Well, I'll leave it to them, but I understand that they're going to be presenting one or more options for mitigating, and the options that we discussed, sort of more informally was the idea of either screening and shielding it, so to speak, in its place, or moving it to another location, closer to the original.
So they will be presenting some options.
I'll leave it to their presentation, but I believe they're presenting at least one or two options for you. And you'll have to discuss those and decide where to go. It might be something to make some tweaks or revisions off of one of those. It might be none item, none of this other option you come up with. But you'll have to decide based on what they're presenting. I think, one of the options that they're presenting seem a little bit more viable than the other. But again, I'll leave it to that.
Okay.
So otherwise they're ready to occupy except for this issue?
Again, it's them to whatever schedules they've had.
Sure.
Maybe just one other thing. The Evergreen, coincidentally, you had a lot that was the Evergreen Commons.
Villages
Yeah. Drive, yeah, at any rate, I understand, and this is just so you understand the context of it, you might have given the turnover of the board here as well, just for context, because you might tangentially hear about it if you're not directly involved in it. It looks like there's going to be at least the question presented to the city council, from the residents there. 38 homes essentially were built years ago. Which you saw tonight for a week ago. To have the street itself accepted by the city, meaning the city will deal with maintenance, plowing, and, and all that kind of stuff. The original discussion years ago was that it was not expected to be, accepted by the city Department of Public Services. Had concerns about that, of course, because they have to take on additional maintenance and whatnot. So, without, again, prejudicing that discussion, that'll be up to the city council, really. It's just unfortunate because there was a discussion about that at the time with the developer when they were before the city and the board. And there was concern about accepting it. And so now, that may be revisited again and in another form, not necessarily before this board, council. It's one of those things where, just by example, as we look at decisions, for instance, like any of these smaller projects, you don't see big ones like that necessarily these days, but for some of it, but smaller courts and lanes, for instance, we always say that's going to be properly maintained, and we make that very clear in the decision. That's the kind of thing I would make sure is explicitly clear in the decisions. At the time, I had recommended that the planning board include language saying this is intended to be private perpetuity, not accepted by the city, and et cetera. And the applicant, the attorney, asked, to have the planning board not encumber the special permit decision with that, language essentially saying leave that to the city council, that's their jurisdiction down the road. The problem with that, of course, as a practical matter, is you then have constituents who are living there and asking for the acceptance of the street. So the developer is essentially making a benefit of, selling lots that are going to be maintained correctly, and then eventually later on might come back as a question of the city. So I have no horse in that race, but I think it's unfortunate that it's sort of like the developer, sort of makes out by saying the city might in the future have to deal with these costs, as a collective, rather than the association. We're building this development, we're selling the homes, we're making a profit of what's happening there. And now there's this question of whether the rest of the taxpayers essentially will have to subsidize the maintenance of those roads that are right now maintained by an association.
Well, one of the conditions that we had in Natick was the clause would say it's a private road. If it were, you would approach the town to make it a town road, you'd have to bring it up to the construction standards. And that's the condition. So it's not saying what if, when, who comes. What you basically say is, sure, if it's up to the condition, drainage, curbing, width, all that.
We don't have it codified in that format here in Newburyport. That we have a similar concern to raise, of course. And in this case, at least what I think some of the owners will speak to is that a lot of the design standards were built to meet most, a chunk of the standards. Maybe not all of them, right? There's some waivers were granted, but I think what they'll be probably presenting is speaking to where they think, it's substantial form. They met, with their curb or drainage, sidewalk improvements, so forth. And so, the argument I heard was because that costs essentially the developer or that more, if therefore, it does sort of that standard where it might be expected to be made by the city versus something that's a shared driveway that got reduced.
But you don't have to do it at the time, right? You could go 20 years as a practical. All it says is when it comes before the city council, all new people don't know anything about the street. Listen to it. They can go back to say, what was the original agreement? And the original agreement has the language that says, if you were to someday, whenever that was, you need to bring it up to that standard.
Yeah.
If it's close, that's fine.
It makes perfect sense here. I think in this case, I wouldn't even have done that. The original decision, like I originally recommended back then, I would just memorialize our decision. It was never intended to be accepted that way, left it there. But that was not what was done here. I think in this case, that would have been a reasonable option too, to codify that, or the city council have that debate now. But I think in this case, just given the context, that was a, debated project in the first place because it was over the water supply, essentially. New development happening in substantial form over the public water supply. So,
and it may not say for this one, but what I'm saying is there are ways to protect.
There are.
That are plain language. We don't know what the future holds, but we can cap it. And then if all the residents say, say it's a private road, they take care of it, and they say, we're done with this, we don't want to plow it anymore. Whatever, then there's an obligation.
Yes. And again, even if the planning board had to memorialize that piece of it, that doesn't necessarily preclude the city council to decide later on based on request. Let's say there's deviation from the standard. City council might still say we want to accept it.
At least they're informed.
Agreed.
And then they don't have to get into the nature of the construction of a road and what's there and all that stuff.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and I think here, to your point, they'll be informed by Department of Services. What the waivers were for granted. There'll be some short discussion about that, but what the current status is, maintain well enough. What's the department? I think the the only question really is what is the Department of Services going to do now? Follow over, you know, any sort of work like that, but it's a great instructor.
Because we all know if it's too lax and they just say, yeah, we'll accept it, they'll have a laundry list of ones that are ready for the next acceptance, right? So the way you get away from that is to say, no, anyone can do it, just not. Again, we are.
So, to be clear, we don't have any, in New Hampshire, the planning board has to make a recommendation to the city council.
Yeah.
For street acceptance. Doesn't exist in Massachusetts.
No, unfortunately, again, this is a little bit sort of lost the continuity, so to speak, in the dialogue here, right? You have changeover of board, different board, you know, bodies sort of acting on the question. I do think it's important one way or the other that the city council have all the information and context that it needs one way or the other, whatever the decision is, and if that's something the council policy, but it's just, I think it's worthwhile given, you know, to have that continuity of information that could otherwise get lost where there's been a transition of everybody and it's sort of lost the paperwork from years ago. No one really maybe recalls what the original discussion was, at least with the developer at the time, if not memorializes the decision. You know, I knew at the time from the Department of Services, just like, you know, other developers we see, you know, they're always noting the fact that taking on additional infrastructure, understandably, would be difficult. So for me to hear that, you know, that's an issue and see here, it is in fact coming back just as expected, you know, leave the open question, it'll come back. Then, you know, then it becomes a question of, you know, how do you take that on?
So if it becomes the public, if the street network becomes municipal, then, and the public really has the right to go on that, but it becomes a fully public street, so anybody can park anywhere there.
City council might at some point decide what to do with parking restrictions in more direct way.
Just think about access to the public pathways and the public records.
Yeah.
You know, so it may make it easier for the public to access the public open space.
It would bring greater control of the city for those types of. Okay, so with that in there, this is a larger discussion. So
Just short, this is good.
Shortest, but for the shortest possible version I can do, and I know since I talk fast. Shortest possible version is I was finally able to get in conversation with the water division, some very good discussion the last couple of months, right? Essentially, as the holiday was happening and sort of picking up now for the holidays. Some information about the city's water supply. We've been talking a lot about the city's water supply system and capital improvements, projects to take care of that properly. I have been efforting as we look at future build out of the city and thinking about areas that we can really affect going forward meaningfully, not smaller piecemeal things that we sometimes see, right? But the bigger ones. Story Avenue is clearly that piece, right? You know, put aside for a second debate we've had about Waterfront West, put aside the MBTA district that's now sort of state mandate and is adopted, right? You know, those two sort of nodes as I look at the map. But we haven't really dealt with fully Story Avenue yet. And what I was concerned about mainly looking at that and looking at the MBTA district and everything else is just making sure that somewhere in here we're actually talking about what is the city's capacity to provide water for future development, and that is somehow baked into our discussion. And lo and behold, in our discussion, boiling it all down very simply, what we got back was we really shouldn't be encouraging any meaningful, you know, order of magnitude increase in residential as part of Story Avenue rezone. That's essentially what it boils down to. We'll talk about this more. I'm going to put together, you know, a memo to summarize this for planning board and city council. That's going to go in, I think, for the 20th of this council, and you know, come to us for discussion with our consultant going into design and whatnot. But it's going to some degree, constrain or modify how we look at the exercise of visioning and rezoning the area. I don't think it necessarily means that we need to preclude the residential, but I do think it means we might want to contemplate some sort of capital moratorium type feature or tool such that the residential can't effectively be built until the city has the plans to provide that capacity, essentially. Yeah, I can, yeah.
So to be clear, just
Yeah.
Is it water supply or is it sewer or is it?
It's water we're talking about here.
So it truly is water supply, not sewer.
Yeah, and sorry, and there's a lot of little sort of weeds we go down to in here, but the some result is it's not necessarily what we can draw down from the ground. It's actually the fact that the plant, and I'm not the water supply expert, right? But it's really, we've had a really good, helpful dialogue about this recently. Is it's essentially that the plant can't push out enough water that is potable water, essentially, that's treated. So whether or not the city gets a new plant and that eliminates that threshold, that probably would be the case with the plant, it would eliminate that threshold issue. But in the interim time, as we contemplate zoning changes, I think it's still beneficial for us to look at that, because I think frankly, trying to redevelop that area without including residential has two factors that I think are problematic. One is not providing the right urban form, I think in some ways, to really change that area in a beneficial way. But two, also, there's not much incentive for us all to do redevelopment. So all those things kind of combined, if nothing else, I think it's beneficial for us to look at that and to sort of contemplate how it would work out. It's just that I think we might want to contemplate and incorporate in our process the timing such that we're guaranteeing we're not going to see someone coming in and getting permits and getting approvals for construction of more units we can support with water. That would make no sense. So I'll leave it to every other community in Massachusetts and, the Boston area about MBTA communities mandates and how that aligns with infrastructure improvements. But I don't know that there's a perfect dialogue, for instance, between the housing folks of the state and say the DEP that's dealing with the water supply, issues. So for instance, it's not like, there's sort of a universal perfect dialogue between create this many units and guarantee there's water supply for them. In some cases, for instance, I've been talking with Newbury, there's overlap here to these things, but Newbury has a question with their sort of MBTA requirements, whether or not that district can be done without substantial infrastructure improvements, whether the utilities, right? So because they take water and sewer, they work Newburyport. So they might have to run some utilities around there, in order to facilitate that sort of thing. And that's not necessarily addressed through the mandate, the zoning, or the adoption of that stuff. So anyway, here it's really largely about making sure that I wouldn't eliminate the consideration of residential there. I think that could be problematic and not as beneficial long term for the city. But I do think we need to contemplate in there what are the shorter term changes we can make that improve the urban form and the experience there and all that. Not necessarily introducing substantial new, order of magnitude residential, meaning hundreds of that's residential units. Rather really talking like not substantial increase there, but contemplating and perhaps incorporating the zoning, something like that, but then postponing the allowance of, say, that permitting or the advancement of that, until the water division can essentially say it's online. The closest example I can think of that we've done here in Newburyport was in the Smart Growth District. Some of you may recall the original district. It was shortly thereafter the adoption, I think, but a restriction was placed on the district saying that on the east side of the traffic circle district, which is that you could not actually come in for a permit before this planning board in that district, even though the district was established. That side of Route 1, you could not do it because there was no safe crossing of Route 1. The city council said it's too concerning for us to do that. At the time, 40R was an option, not a mandate, so it only affected how much grant funds, essentially, sort of benefit funds we were getting from the Commonwealth for adopting a district at the time. It wasn't a mandate sort of situation. So I think it was sort of the right decision to basically say, all right, we're concerned about safety of people trying to navigate a district, but we're defining a district around Mass DOT's giant traffic circle. So here, now that we have a successful crossing, that's the we did an amendment to take the sentence out of the zoning, but effectively that provision went away when Mass DOT made that crossing because that condition of the zoning was satisfied. So here we, akin to that structure, basically saying the zoning, you might have the zoning in place in the books, but it might not be, something worth.
It's like a master plan versus an actual open for business. Open property.
Yeah. So there's multiple ways of going about that. I think the main thing to kind of think about, this might shift a little bit how you're thinking about what you want to do or options are, but it constrains a little bit because I think a lot of us were thinking about is, trying to get back to, sort of the quote unquote traditional urban form as much as we can, right? Might have residential clubs, some shops, it becomes harder to tear down and say, are they getting more square footage? Are they, what's happening there? They're getting so it just
so depending, following on the example of the 40R district, one way to do it might be to do the master plan, strategic plan for the whole area, but we zone part of it at a time. So if we have capacity for 100 new units, just that much of them, because market basket is in the near future. So even if we rezone that capacity, nothing has happened, so we could be looking at the street front.
Yeah, and I agree with your notion there, mainly because without going into the weeds again, just looking, I'm not going to go through here and go back and forth over all together, but the sum result is that the sort of build out table, if you kind of ask about it, going back to what the water division was essentially, and I can break this down a little bit before, but for each major zoning district we have that hasn't sort of been built out, or might be expected, in the future, any developments that are there. The pipeline assigning, a number of units to that essentially and saying, all right, what's left over, essentially, right, from our water supply, what's left over. It wasn't, I wouldn't say it's a true zero. And the reason I said that is because you could have a debate about whether or not units were assigned here versus there, whether there's a slight increase that might happen that might offset there for provide sufficient units. So it's more akin to, I think, like a lower magnitude, like within a 100, 200 unit type thing, right, for practical reality versus say a true zero. But it's just that it shifted it back from the possibility of say, a 300 to 500 unit or more type, village, decades down the road, if all units were built out in the entire rezoning district. You're not going to see that order of magnitude necessarily with something we're authorizing now, because we would say, we're not ready to bring those units online. We don't want anybody coming in for permitting until we're ready to do that. When DPS, Public Services, the water division's got that plant coming online or it's running, then they can come in for their permits beyond the threshold. But we might want to have that discussion about where those units are assigned. And maybe it results in focusing on one area versus another for those allowances or what becomes super later. So we should.
I'm sort of thinking about you may know more about this. I have no idea what's going to happen to Pennyworth.
Yeah.
Capital taking it over. So that might be an ideal place for a small
Yeah.
multi-family development. And then the shops were sent there. There's another one.
Yeah.
Just look at that area.
What about ADUs? I mean, even a modest assumption of implementation of ADUs would create.
For our build out, again, this is very broad question, or something like that, very hard to predict, and you report with all the lots, not knowing who's going to come in when, but I just put 100 units as a placeholder in our build out analysis for that purpose. So for instance, put in the 1,292 units for the MBTA district, and assuming a full build out, remember, these aren't going to happen all at once, so
Right.
it's very possible that we'll have a new plant before we reach a build out and all these things together cumulatively.
So this map incorporated some assumption of ADUs.
It did, yeah. I tried to, again, trying to cover the
Right,
obvious
yes,
things that we should, but again, that could be hard to know because, we don't have that many units coming right now. If I'm, of course, I'm assigning that based on a decade worth of ADU permitting, I don't really know.
No one knows.
No one knows.
This is a struggle a lot of BTA communities are facing that aren't MWRA. That literally you can't meet the criteria because of water supply.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's completely defensible. Or debate where this is, to me, it's completely defensible to explain that infrastructure is only that's very different than saying you don't want density or, so to me, if it goes back to the public health safety issue like not being able to provide water, that's something everybody wants to,
Definitely lifts the water plant higher on the priority scale.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we're gonna probably be in a position, one way or the other, whatever the time frame is, before a full build out of the city, and all these things together. Probably before the cumulative build out like that, we're gonna have a new plan, which means the limitation will probably go away, which means it's still beneficial for us to look at this, and I think it's for a good reason. It just means that we should contemplate not necessarily authorizing that right away. I think is really
But you can still have the master plan, you can still have the intent.
Yeah.
Just can't release it.
Yeah, it's just, it puts that constraint more on the time frame. I think, piece
Yeah,
of it,
yeah.
yeah. So, and then the incentive for someone to do it is sort of committed until that.
There's also not to get into the whole track. Given the current discussion.
Yeah.
We would add the kind of significant density we sort of contemplated. So, traffic.
So have you signed a contract for the non-water part of this project, or you?
No, that's just changing the scope slightly from the last week or two, maybe because we literally had this meeting about 2 weeks ago. We discussed this. The number was sort of tracking down as we were discussing.
So you do actually have in this contract, you actually have a target number of units you were looking at?
No, but what has to happen here is I want the consultant to work with us on, sort of, again, their job is to help us with the sort of design of the master plan sort of visioning exercise with the block network, right? The form we're trying to create. But how do we codify and adopt, as much of that sort of thing as we can? That does not include the upper floor residential buildings, and substantial change.
So one approach is it doesn't change the long-term aspiration. It's an additional scope to figure out, okay, it's additional complexity of implementation. It's not necessarily changing anything about what the final vision is.
That's exactly how I look at it. It's just that in our discussion, one of the suggestions that was made, not, that's my thing, it was one of the suggestions made was maybe we don't necessarily want to look at this right now because it's so early from the water supply perspective. I think most of us in this room would agree that this is very good reason to plan ahead for what we want to have there. And the water supply capital limitation is only informing the timeframe maybe more so rather than the overall master plan. Is also suggesting. I agree with that notion. I don't necessarily think our visioning exercise should be limited in true sense by that water supply capacity cap more than the timeframe of the allowance should be. I think.
Once you establish the vision, you need to kind of look at it through the lens of the water supply. Because those are gonna be the questions.
Sewer capacity, I mean, there's gonna be construction.
And
So
it's not just Newbury, it's West, it's Newbury and West Newbury too, because they're driving from the same.
figuring out how to present this in a way that you show a phased implementation of an overall master plan, so it has a logic relative to all those capacity.
Yeah.
Makes a lot.
Yeah, I mean, to Rick's point, we could have like this block, right, that area is the first piece that comes online, right? Another block is that, right?
We have to get a roundabout out there at some point.
Yeah. What is your deadline for this, for the grant project?
Well, right now we have until May, June, but the grant person will give us an extension if we need it. This is separate from the whole thing about the this and that whole fiscal year. But that's the time we're working. So we may want to extend that based on where we are, but it's just, this has put a little bit of a, you know, kink in sort of how I was visioning, because I was hoping we had a little bit more order of magnitude than, you know, sort of in there at the initial point to assume that we could adopt something now. And here's, not that I think everybody's sort of coming in the door for permitting, but the camera would be coming on.
It seems like you should, it seems like 6 months is easy for doing the vision. The zoning, you can wait until later.
Well, yeah, and actually, frankly, that's what's going to happen is our visioning is going to happen. We're going to do the visioning exercise, the illustration, the presentation of that piece of it, and that's going to then inform essentially a formal zoning process when we do it. It'll be, we might have to deal with sort of summer recess process, but certainly from say late spring to fall, we would then pick up something more formal based on what we did in our visioning. What I would like the consultant to help us with is not just sort of showing what that can be and helping us to establish that block network and reform and saying this is what we can sort of create, but actually that has to align with specific design standards. So as we go back, we say like, is there a floor step back? Is there, how close is the building to the street? Is parking behind the building? Those are design standards, for instance, that we should talk about, and will probably be in some cases universal anyway, regardless of the scenario. So I think we'd want to try to codify if we could some of those things now, even if they're not allowed as residential development.
Well, a lot of them will be, you won't even need to think about the setback if you make a two-story building. So
Well, exactly. It becomes less important or relevant for something, but you still might contemplate because depending on when we put that allowance in zoning and how it happens, do we codify something now to address it, or do we wait until? So agreed, 100%. So anyway, think about what that area would be sort of interim in as a not any new substantial residential versus the longer term, which I think is the one that I continue to focus on. Probably I think it's something most of us are focusing on longer term because that is really, I look at it as only sort of a temporary situation perhaps.
So you think there might be the first public visioning session might be like in March or something?
No, February I think would be.
Good. Okay.
It's the first meeting I have with the council to give, and I can't remember the new composition of the council. I wanted to figure out, working with them and their committee, planning development committee, typically, the times in which they will be able to, or come and meet with us, have, workshops, discuss together. We'll have our offline group, of course, in between, but the formal part where we actually have meetings and walk through with the consultant or go through what we're working on. I want to figure out how we can sort of dovetail with them so that as we go through the process together, we get to the end result and we're on the same page, ultimately speaking of the overall scheme. And then that obviously hopefully will inform and track it to whatever zoning changes make sense. And we're on the same, we're on the same train the whole time rather than a disconnect where we're operating in a vacuum over here and then we're discussing with the city council. So because they don't have a meeting until the 20th, obviously, as they pick up their meeting, committee assignments as well. With that, we can sort of pick up with them and figure out how they fit into the exercise with us. But in any event, we'll undertake it. It's just I would like to have them participate in as many meetings as possible with us in this process, not have us do it here.
Are you going to have public meetings aside the aren't board meetings?
Yes.
Like sure type things?
Yeah, and that was actually part of my concern with one of the consultants we talked previously was that there was not as much interest in that aspect. I actually like to be here with us and just with the visualization and
And then remember when we did the strategic plan for the industrial, park, now the business park, we had a big public meeting at Old Church. And, you know, there's a big vacant space in Fort Plaza. We did have a big. Sure. Maybe, maybe depending on what happens at the ZBA.
Build a full-scale model.
Yeah.
Yeah. Know anything up there right now, like a sports, they can't remember. Beat it up there, but certainly, but certainly, I definitely agree. And I do think, you know, recognizing that the public is not going to necessarily have all the details of a planner or, you know, engineer. But to get the visioning part at the beginning and the visioning, at least, you know, somewhere along the way at the end, you know, of the broader public, not just us and not just the city council, but also the broader public giving feedback to
People
us.
will land in the area.
Right. Do they like what they're seeing? Do they think that these changes will be beneficial to the city long term? And therefore, you know, I would hope there'd be, you know, an appreciation. This is actually beneficial to the city long term. Therefore, we want to adopt some changes with the zoning to allow that to happen. Whatever phasing we allow, you know, is detailing gets baked in there, but we allow that to happen over time. I do think over decades of time, remember this doesn't happen all at once, that would be beneficial to the city. I do not believe that keeping it as a true zero cap essentially would be beneficial. I think it would make it very hard to change it. So that's one reason, at least, to allow, you know, or consider the possibility of additional residential, or hope that a new plan coming online at some point allows that to happen. So anyway, I will send you some more information on this, and I just recognize that, like, fill out table, any sort of summary of that is, there's a little bit of, you know, give or take here and there. It's meant to illustrate the magnitude, you know, something for here, but that's essentially what we landed on at the end of the day. When I was, you know, initially thinking based on our discussion and hoping that we have a latitude there for the unit count, it looks like that just sort of immediate allowance, we really would be looking to encourage, you know, immediately.
Motion to adjourn? Or anything else? I should ask if there's anything.
We're a little slow.
All those in favor?
That's, I can tell Alden's not here because he's usually.